Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host as always, Steve Hall, and I am joined by Lyndon Purcell, who hopefully some of you are aware of. I say this all the time when I have a new guest on the show. Hopefully you're aware of, or I'm sure you're aware of, and Lyndon is someone who I'd like you to be aware of. Obviously everyone who comes on the show, I definitely want you to be aware of, and that's because he is an incredibly smart individual, very humble as you'll find out, and has some really interesting thoughts and insights into many of the things we're going to be talking about today. And he is the co-presenter for JPS Mentorship. So many of you may know JPS, you know Jacob Skepis, the guys over there. I always view Lyndon kind of as Jacob's kind of like right-hand man or something along those lines, like the smarts behind Jacob. Jacob's just the front. So Lyndon is the smarts. He is the JPS education content creator. He has a master's in high performance sports science, a bachelor of applied science, exercise and sport science, a strength and conditioning coach, ASCA level 1 for those of you who know what that is, and FMA level 1 as well. I suppose there's Australian qualifications, and the big reason we're having Lyndon on, we wanted him on anyway, but a big reason we're getting him on now is to make you very much aware that him and Jacob are coming over on July 14th, which is a Sunday. So hopefully many people are free to Bath, and we'll be doing a contest prep seminar, kind of releasing our complete guide. Many of you hopefully will be aware that we've been working relentlessly at this ebook for actually now years. Me and Jacob discussed it, and Lyndon, that we were going to create this, and we've just basically been nurturing it over a long period of time. During that time, obviously lots of other ones have come out, but we've been relentlessly building ours to be what we think is going to be the ultimate guide, essentially, is what we want it to be. And that's what we're going to be presenting on. So if you do want to come and see Jacob, see Lyndon, see myself and Pascal present, that'd be amazing. You will also get the contest prep ebook, which is the day it's being released. You also get free access to the JPS Education Online Physique Contest Prep course, which myself and Pascal kind of contributed to, which is super exciting as well. They're doing fantastic work over there. So Lyndon, without further ado, anything else you want to say? Anything else about Lyndon you want the people to know?
I would just like to say you are 100% right. I am the brains behind the whole operation down here. Jacob, I wouldn't even say is a pretty face, to be honest. So no, honestly, that's a very yeah, huge quads. No, that's a very flattering introduction. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome. So if we want to jump into something you'll be presenting on when you come over to Bath, which is the physiology of physique contest prep, which I think is getting, at least a lot of our audience are aware of a lot of the things that are going on, and we're getting more and more educated on how to attenuate a lot of those things. But having looked over your sections of the ebook and the amount of detail you go into, I think there's things a lot of people don't even consider. But if we start off kind of the considerations before even entering a contest preps to know that you're in a good state physiologically, and then go into what changes we can expect, and then maybe we can go into strategies around those.
Yeah, for sure. So for starters, I would like to just, as you said, people are becoming more aware of physiology, and the term is starting to click and resonate with people. People sort of hear physiology and they're starting to turn their heads. I think we do just need to be aware of like what it actually means. Like we are really just describing like the processes that are occurring on a cellular level, like how our body is ultimately functioning between, you know, cells, tissues, organs, that kind of thing. So just because someone, I guess, puts up a post about fat loss physiology or muscle growth physiology doesn't necessarily tell you much about it. Like, and I feel like a lot of people are starting to use the term somewhat as a bit of a marketing sort of ploy. So that's really what a lot of my presentation is going to be about, sort of thing, is just like what, even now that science has become sexy, like how can we still strip science down to like what it just is actually telling us? So when it comes to, I guess, being in a very, we want to be in probably like a stable physiological state. That's, I guess, at least a good starting point. So anything that disturbs our comfort zone in physiology, our homeostasis is hopefully a term that most people are aware of now. anything that disturbs homeostasis, we can basically deem as a stress. And in order for our body to sense that it is not in a stressful place, we pretty much, for the last at least recent history, we don't want to have tried to have changed it in any way, which is like I've just finished going through obviously your section of the book and just making sure it obviously lines up with obviously the terminology that Jacob and I have been using, and you talk about primer phases, and like I think the way at least I likened a primer phase to my section of the book is it's like doing the tutorial before like the rest of the game sort of thing. It's like, yeah, the easy levels or like those first few stages of a contest prep or a diet, or like this doesn't have to be contest prep related specifically, but just like physique development. Those first few weeks, even months of a diet are going to be relatively, easy comparatively at least. So why not just jump straight in? But you don't do the tutorial just to be able to pass the first two levels. You do the tutorial so you understand what you actually need to do. So that this button's kick, this button's punch. And then when you're playing those first few levels, because you've already got a grasp on the key concepts, you can just work on ingraining them, and then they're ingrained by the time you need them. Whereas, yeah, sure, you could have progressed to those first few weeks regardless, but because you were sort of figuring it out as you go, by the time you need it to be ingrained, it's like, well, now you're up against something that is really challenging. So that did not answer your question, but basically we don't want to have, I guess, any substantial diet history behind us. That's probably the biggest one. Secondly, you want to be relatively lean. So obviously those are rather paradoxical. Like, it's hard to be relatively lean without having diet history behind you. And I think this is one of the reasons that contest prep should be respected. And obviously, again, this is something you talk about a lot, of just doing a good job of what you do and making sure the right people are getting involved. Like, it's so easy to start a contest prep, or so easy to start. I don't think it should be. Like, a contest prep should be relatively easy if you do all the hard work before that. And the hard part is ultimately getting lean without having dieted extensively. So I think if you can take care of that, you can set yourself up for just much more smooth sailing. Like, and we can talk about nutraceutical concordance and, ways to mitigate metabolic adaptation and things like this. But ultimately, if you're not stressing your body out, you've given it plenty of food, but you're not, 20% over stage weight, then you can at least have a pretty good run at it.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have that initial consideration, because I think a lot of people do start I'm a bit out of shape, I need to lose some weight. Oh, let's just start a prep. But it's like, well, that's going to be a year-long diet, or you're going to be losing it at a radical pace and end up having terrible performance and losing substantial amounts of muscle, and it's going to be hell for you. And I know we were talking off air about my first contest prep where my girlfriend Charlotte almost left me, and this is because I didn't have a strong, solid base to start from. I was way over fat. I had a lot of weight to lose. So I think it just puts so much credence to your kind of contest prep starts in the off season, where you actually manage things in an effective manner to get to a point where you're having that primer, where you're kind of getting everything in shape, in line, resensitization, a lot of the kind of physiology, putting it into a nice homeostasis so that you can start your comp prep from a really solid, strong base. So yeah, I think that is the first thing to consider. And then once we start dieting, what kind of changes are we seeing to our physiology once we start stressing it, once we start going to a caloric deficit? What do we see happen? And then maybe talk about like rates of loss and as well. That'd be kind of interesting to hear.
Yep. Yeah. So probably the easiest place to start framing this conversation is around where our energy expenditure comes from. So like, obviously we've got our basal metabolic rate, we've got exercise activity thermogenesis, we've got our non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and our thermic effect of food. basically they all start shrinking. So regardless of how we go about it, how optimally we design our protocol, they all start getting smaller. But as we said, those first few stages should be relatively trouble-free. And so those first few weeks, if you've gone for the sort of, at least the range of optimal deficit, you might lose 1 to 2% that first week or two. But then over time, we probably want to start looking towards that 1%, maybe 1.5% per week. And this is, again, we're talking averages. But then probably once, you're at least like moderately lean to the average individual, I'd be erring on the side of sort of 0.7 to 1% per week. And then over time, really just getting towards that 0.5 as you get leaner and leaner. And then I think you've put some excellent posts up in the past about, when you're in that last third leg of the prep, something like that, like scale weight changes can be microscopic, and like you need to be using a number of other variables to deal with that. But when it comes to changes on physiological level, we've got, I guess, all the sort of the ones that probably most people are aware of, but we can start elucidating them a little bit more. Leptin drops relatively quickly. Like there's a substantial drop in, less than a week of dieting, and then so that's related to acute energy availability. And then as the diet progresses, leptin is basically proportional to how much fat we have in our body. And leptin is known as a satiety hormone, but it does so many more other things than that. So leptin also strongly relates to energy expenditure, and it stimulates, I think, brown adipose tissue as well, which is basically tissue that stimulates heat, but not energy production, sort of a thing. So we've got, which is where a lot of metabolic adaptation actually starts to come into it. So one of the physiologically, it's brilliant. Like it's one of the reasons that our bodies learn to survive over these years. But as physique athletes and people looking to get diced, these issues start popping up when our body starts producing less and less heat and more energy with the resources it's given. So the question was, what are the physiological changes that start happening?
I could dig into that a little bit, actually. I think that's interesting because you talked about, obviously, leptin's one of the physiological things that we see. It drops. And you talked about the heat sort of element of that, and heat kind of thermogenesis, that is kind of related. And a lot of people, just as maybe as a bit of a tangent, I guess, but a lot of people in contest prep, certainly in my first contest prep, I can remember times at which I was so cold. It's just like horrendously cold. Second contest prep, when I had the primer phase, I did things a bit more cleverly. There was very few periods at which I was very cold, which is brilliant for peak week. I mean, that's a whole different subject. But when I was peaking, when I was really cold, horrendous. There's so many issues with not being able to actually get warm during kind of on show day. But is that related? A lot of people think of getting cold is because of the fact you have less fat. But how much is it that, and how much is it actually related to the fact that we're seeing some of these adaptations?
Oh yeah, it's definitely all tied together. So fat, it does provide insulation, as you said. So it's sort of, that is how effectively we can keep our heat production in. However, there is just that reduction in heat production. So like fat is also metabolically active tissue. So there's some reduced heat production there, as well as some interesting things that, are just going on at a mitochondrial level and things like that. So you've got increased proton leak, which is basically, so at any period of time, we've got the inner membrane of the mitochondria, okay? Now, hopefully your listeners are aware of what the mitochondria is. So we've got a mitochondria, sorry, I'll start bigger. And then we've got the outer membrane and then the inner membrane. Basically, we produce protons through through various biochemical pathways in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, and they then get pumped out to the other side. Pumped out of the other side of the inner membrane of the mitochondria to the intermembrane space. Are you follow me? Sorry, my brain is still obviously waking up. So now they're in between the two membranes in the mitochondria. Now they come back in via an enzyme called ATP synthase, and that is how we produce our energy. So what happens is we end up with so many protons or hydrogen ions in that space. As we know, our body likes homeostasis, and if it has a very high concentration of protons in this area and a very low concentration here, they like to get back in. And when they come back in, the way they come back in is through the enzyme ATP synthase. So basically, they come through this turbine-shaped enzyme, and as the protons come through it, they make it spin, and basically what it does is it grabs an ADP and a phosphate and just sort of jams them together. Right. And cool, now we've got ATP. However, as we diet more and more, and this all sort of produces heat, and there's lots of things going on in the body at the same time, as we diet more and more of those protons, the way that changes is we get a decreased proton leak. So over time, or through regular dieting and just regular eating, we have a number of protons that just seep through the membrane back into the inner membrane. And once they're in there, they get oxidized and burned, and basically these calories get burned and heat gets produced. However, as we diet and energy becomes more and more scarce, the proton leak reduces. So we get, for the same amount of heat production, we start producing more ATP because more of them have to come back through that ATP synthase enzyme complex. Sorry, I did a bad job of explaining that.
No, I think you made, like, it's complex. Like, these things, like, people know, oh yeah, I get cold. And it's like, well, actually, do you know all the physiology behind that? Again, like a sciencey term that's being oversold. A lot of people don't actually understand, and I don't understand to the degree that you do, all of that's going on. And what I'm seeing there is, and a lot of the reason, the things we're talking about in that, a lot of the things that are happening to the body are like survival strategies. We're becoming more efficient at producing energy. And so the body also doesn't want to waste as much. So you get colder. Just like a lot of people, like right now, I'm like almost peak mass and I'm basically sweating all the time. And it's just horrendous because the body is just like, it wants to burn off this energy because right now it wants to try and fight you to get back down. So it's just some of these things we see go on. And it's kind of like, well, when you know the rationale behind why it's happening, it's a bit less scary. Whereas I think, especially for people who are, and hopefully we're helping people with this book who have never done a contest prep, and they can read it and they can be like, oh, right, okay, so getting cold is like a normal response. I'm not just weird, and this isn't like, this is fine to be happening. In terms of other things, so obviously we talked kind of like hunger, energy levels, talk about some of the kind of the things like libido, testosterone levels. What kind of can we expect there?
Yeah, so ultimately it's all bad news. That hunger will start increasing, libido will start going down, testosterone will start going down. That they're all going to be dietary and lifestyle related. So provided you have adequate fat in your diet, you probably still, will have some at least decent sex hormone production, like your testosterone still should be doing its thing. It's all going to be relative, obviously, to the person of how lean they're starting. As we've spoken before off air, like now if you started a contest prep, or when you'll start your next contest prep sort of a thing, like you'll probably have quad separation, hopefully before you start feeling anything too dramatic. But before, like the first time you prepped, you probably didn't even have a bicep vein before you were being like, fuck, this is going to hell. So in the early stages of prep, I still would like to think like people wouldn't be experiencing these things to too much of a dramatic degree. yes, you may get some hunger, but a lot of that will be just habitual in nature. Like it's very common to sort of, for those first 1 to 3 weeks, to be like, man, I'm hungry and I've just started a diet sort of thing. But then it's sort of, you forget about it and you really start to find your rhythm. And then, hopefully that continues for another couple of months. Testosterone can be iffy, at least just like anecdotally, because, we're working with people here in the gym. We're not getting blood panels and that sort of a thing. Theoretically, I can talk to you about what testosterone may or may not do. But there's this weird sort of thing, I guess, about the male libido. I won't pretend to be an expert on the female libido, that's for sure. The male libido is when they start dieting, and as they get increasingly leaner and leaner, they start feeling a little bit better. Like, they start posting a few more selfies on Instagram, a few more late night Snapchats, that kind of a thing. But then they reach that point and it really reverses. And so like theoretically their testosterone should be dropping, but maybe with aromatase conversion and reducing some of that body fat, testosterone might go up a little bit. It's just going to depend on those lifestyle factors. But I think, ultimately people shouldn't be trying to juice their testosterone up by taking massively high amounts of fat in, but also just really not expecting it to plummet. Like if we do, a term I like using when speaking about physiology is we try to coax it along. Like you never really want to try and change it or disrupt it in any major way, because when it comes to physiology, for every gimme, there's a gotcha. If you try to take more, it will take greater amounts back. So you're really trying to just live within your means, or whatever that saying is. Not live beyond your means. Just drop at the rate that you can sustain, that isn't going to start causing you to start fighting with your girlfriend because you're moody, or start disrupting your sleep. If you can keep all those things in play, like you can really keep these anabolic hormones up and keep those hunger hormones at bay. I think where we start to run into more physiological problems is once the psychology becomes disrupted. If that, because they're so closely linked, anything that is starting to cause you psychological stress is probably going to have, there's going to be a greater production of, say, things like cortisol and things like this on a physiological level. And that is where it does actually start to get pear-shaped, because cortisol and just other catecholamines, not just cortisol, should be demonized. It does start to do, I guess, all the bad things that we don't want to happen. Again, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think, well, at least it really, the coaxing, I think, is brilliant, because I don't know where I heard the phrase, but it's kind of like coax the body, don't shock the body. And I think a lot of times when people go into diets, like the yo-yo diet is the shock, and then they quickly get what you talked about, for every gimme you got a gotcha, which sounds like a bit of an Australian phrase. I'm not sure if it is, but it sounds typically Aussie. I really like it because there isn't, it's like any concept within biology, there isn't, with any response, there's kind of yin and a yang, there's a stress response. Even things that deem themselves like unstressful, like being in a calorie surplus, you think, oh, that's not stressful. It's actually, there is a stress related to that because it's taking away from homeostasis. So I really like that. And there are little things, like I can even anecdotally say, I've had clients in contest prep where they seemingly haven't lost weight for like 4 weeks, when you kind of know they're in a deficit. And then I just like, okay, I'll adjust the calories down just 100, kind of with an inkling that like, just maybe it was just an element of the psychology of that person. Then they were like less stressed that next week, because they're like, I'm down 100 calories, so maybe I'm going to lose more this week. And then it just seems to come off. And I think that is part of what you were talking about there. And I guess this is part of attenuating some of these changes that are going on, is do small little adjustments, and that should be manageable because you've put yourself in a good state from the get-go. You shouldn't have to make anything drastic going on there.
Yeah, I think that's probably something that we're trying to do with that primer phase beforehand, or just that phase of no pushing the body in any direction. We're just letting it run its course the way it wants to, sort of thing. Is we're somewhat creating a more robust physiology. Like, I guess whenever you're trying to pull it in any direction, which we tend to do as strength athletes or as physique athletes, it's always like, oh, if I'm not getting bigger, I've got to get stronger. If I'm not getting stronger and I'm not getting bigger, then I've got to get leaner. Like, it's kind of like we're very simple individuals at a fundamental level. It's like we've got three options: eat more, eat less, or lift more, sort of a thing. If you do just let the body chill out, then it does sort of, become a little more robust, a little more able to sustain what's to come. But as we know with sort of just recovery in general, just because now we've got an ability to sustain more doesn't mean we should be doing more, sort of a thing. It's kind of like if you buy up all that physiological space, to sort of start using rather abstract terms, and then we can just keep edging away, chipping away, and just it's going to be a much longer time before we start running into hurdles at that rate, rather than just trying to walk a knife's edge. Having finished a really stressful 16-month bulk or something like that, physiology is just feeling tanked. And sorry, before I actually finish that thought, I think it's probably more important to jump in with this, is there's so much more to physiology than just what we conceive as, again, what we do in the fitness industry. Like, yes, if you're not dieting, sure, it's probably a good idea to be in calorie surplus or calorie maintenance. But, what about other, like, just general health metrics? Like, are you getting taken care of, like, your blood pressure? How's all your hormones? Like, just because you've been in a mass doesn't mean that your hormones are going to be in a great position. Like, if you're drinking alcohol multiple times a week, you're not managing your stress well, you're not sleeping super well, you're fluctuating between how much and how often you train, all these things. Like, there's really is big rocks when it comes to physiology. And I think for the ones that are appropriate here, it's stress management, training, dieting, cardio, something like that, sleep. And there's no guarantee that just because you've been in a calorie surplus, all those things will be taken care of. So, I think that's where, again, I'll drum on about this till the cows come home. But you do need to start getting those things settled during that primer phase, because once the challenges of contest prep start coming up, as they certainly will, to bring it back to physiology, is if you start running into hurdles and these things stress you out psychologically, this will have a profound effect on your physiology. Now, to go back to cortisol, yes, we know it as a catabolic hormone that, destroys all our hard-earned muscle tissue, but it also converts, it also has an effect on thyroid hormone, and it reduces the production of thyroid stimulating hormone. So there isn't going to be as much thyroid hormone produced. And it also influences the form that, sorry, I just need to put this jumper on and put it not on, put it around my shoulders. It also influences what form thyroid hormone takes. So we've got T4, T3, reverse T3, and ultimately, like, we want T3. That's the one that's going to do the job that we want. It's going to keep our metabolic rate up. It has a role in protein synthesis, all these things. But as we get more and more stressed, cortisol production, as I said, starts inhibiting how much thyroid hormone is produced, and it starts converting T4 into reverse T3, which is basically blocking up all the receptors where we want T3 binding. So it's like we're getting less produced, and now of the thing that we want binding, less of that has a place to bind to, as well as all the other catabolic effects of cortisol, and has centralizing effects of adipose tissue as well. So it's like you could be losing muscle, losing fat off your arms and then restoring fat on your abs, to sort of paint a very bad picture. But I guess like what I want people to take away from this is not that cortisol is the devil, is unmanaged stress is the devil, basically. So we really do need to be stacking the odds in our favor of, okay, what can possibly come up? What can possibly trip me over? What can derail this prep? Understanding what stresses you can tolerate, how you can go about them. Like, what is the harm in being over prepared? Like, just, taking some time, getting it all sorted, and then, physiologically and psychologically, and then sure, you have a smooth sailing prep. Like I've heard people complain about like hiring a coach and then the prep went smoothly, like almost flawlessly, and they're like, I didn't need him. I was like, what? Like, a contest prep is like retarded. Like, it's not advised for beginners.
Yeah.
So like, if it goes smoothly, be like, fucking fantastic. Like, I'm so glad that I was over prepared. I haven't, destroyed my psychology, my body, anything like that. If you come out of it scar-free, then you've done very well. So yeah, I've made the point numerous times now, but get yourself sorted physiologically, psychologically, and then hopefully have someone guide you through the process in a relatively competent manner. At least read the ebook. And yeah, you definitely set yourself up for success much more, or reduced negative trade-offs, that's for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think in terms of when we're going through the prep, what are some of the strategies that you think are useful to attenuate some of the inevitable increases in prep? Obviously, we talked about kind of starting off in a good place and potentially solidifying some habits, but what are some of the kind of the habits, the routines, the structure, the elements that we can help ourselves, maybe all the way up to potentially even supplementation? I guess there could be some things that we could do there.
Yeah. So things that we need to be, I guess, doing with a contest prep, we should probably start there. It's like, we need to be in a calorie deficit, as we know, like, just everyone will know that, but just so we're all on the same page, we're probably going to be doing some cardio. We're going to be doing some training. So things that, and we need to be sleeping and managing stress. So if we look at all those things, what is going to help us do those things? So the habits and routines, regardless of physiology, is going to be more important. What clicks with you psychologically? From my observations and working with people and people within JPS, it seems to be much easier to get that sort of cardio in probably in the earlier half of the day, at least just from my perspective, from what I've seen, or at least like get the body moving. Like, you don't want to sort of end up at 4 p.m. and being like, fuck, I've still got 10,000 steps to do today, or still got an hour of cardio. Like, if you can start chipping away that movement early in the day, that's great. And even if it is just getting up and going for a walk around the block and then you make your breakfast, like, just start chipping away at that, get that blood flowing. You start to feel pretty good in the morning. You can feel pretty good in the morning. And then if you can obviously backload some of that food later half of the day, that can help keep you up. So I think, getting that cardio in whenever, this is one of those things where the science community has sort of pushed back a little on the fasted cardio idea, where but it does just work, like, in the way that it's easy for people to execute. And if they're believing that there is some inherent fat burning benefit to getting that cardio in before they eat a meal, I'm not going to sit here and say that isn't happening. So we're super aware now of like the placebo effect and the influence our psychology can have on our physiology. And if anyone doesn't believe me on that, I highly recommend you go and read. There's an article on Stronger by Science, Greg Knuckles' website, that just talks about the influence of psychology on physiology and the different results that participants got in a study when basically they thought they either had a bad gene for aerobic exercise or for obesity. And then there's another one he wrote about in an article a while back about a group of lifters thinking they got steroids, and it was just placebo. And as we know, the placebo effect is an effect, and it's a very, very beneficial effect. So if you're getting up, and I know I'm kind of defeating the purpose of the placebo effect by telling people to placebo themselves, but if you're a coach listening to this and you have contest prep athletes, don't be so quick to be like, oh, you don't have to do your cardio in the morning. Like it doesn't actually help with fat burning. Like if they're keen to do it and they think it's going to enhance their fat burning, you're not necessarily lying, because they are burning a greater percentage of fat. As we know, like it probably might all equal out in the wash. But yeah, I think getting up, having some kind of consistent activity, probably in the morning and the evening, is the easiest thing to start looking at for cardio. Like if it's a walk before you eat a meal and then your structured cardio in the evening, that's fine. But I just wouldn't be lumping all your physical activity into one part of the day, because that's when you will just push that body beyond that little boundary that it's set up for itself, and you might just snap and you feel that oh man, I'm so fatigued today. It's like, yeah, you did that extra 5-10 minutes of cardio and you did not have that in you. And that extra 5 minutes, you may have burned 12 more calories that may mean you sit on your bum for the rest of the day and burn 80 calories less. So it's not just about looking at things on long time scales and being like, we can't push our physiology too far by running a bulk straight into a deficit. It's also just about within the day. Like our physiology is changing minute by minute, second by second. So just not trying to take that too much at any stage. So if that's cardio, same sort of deal with weight training. Like you're going to have to push it hard, but you can't push it hard all the time. So making sure you just have your deloads in place, having a good understanding of your volume landmarks and things like that will ensure you're doing your physiology justice. Stressing enough, but not too much. Most people probably, just again, speaking anecdotally and from observation, start to lift a little better once they've got at least 1 or 2 meals in. So maybe you train on your lunch break or something like that. I know our work style is very fortunate. Like we're in a gym all day, so it's hard to start, comparing to the average individual. But it's like if you're a uni student or if you're at work, yeah, maybe the middle part of the day is the best bet for starting to train. If you leave it to the evening, you really might be hauling ass by then, struggling. And you're so mentally fatigued from trying to just concentrate with low blood glucose for the entire day that it's not your best chance of stimulating what you need to stimulate in the gym. So a meal or two, place you can have some caffeine. That's obviously going to help. We know that's very beneficial. Maybe biasing something like 60-40. If someone can train in the middle of the day, I do try and skew their calories to sort of like a 30 to 40% before, 60 to 70% afterwards. Like it's just the way nutrient partitioning works is basically you're going to partition it more favorably if you eat it more recently after training. Okay. Like, yeah, we know calories in, calories out on a daily basis. It all doesn't matter, but it's calories in, calories out really just tells us about the mass of the entire system. So we can do various things, obviously, to store those calories more favorably. And, if we're looking at someone's nutrient partitioning and they trained at midday the day before and they're training at midday today, it probably doesn't make a ton of sense to eat a lot of calories in that first half of the day before midday. because it's still a relatively long period of time since their previous training session. So maybe eat a smaller amount of your calories before your training session. And then once you stimulate muscle protein synthesis, GLUT4, the ability to pull glucose into the cell where you want it to, that's when we start loading up on the calories a little bit more again. Then something like when it comes to stress management, I do find it hard to go past just the recommendation of like daily meditation, or like just download the app Headspace, something like that, Waking Up by Sam Harris, and like do 3 to 5 minutes of that every day. Like just find a period of the day when you can do that. And then what you learn and the benefits you gain from that meditation practice, trying to employ that throughout the rest of the day. Like that is the real, I think, benefit of meditation, is it's not the acute, oh, cool, I feel better now. Like, because if you just then go and do that, and then as you're walking out your bedroom door, you bang your hip on the door, which I do all the time. And you're like, oh, fuck. And then you're just pissed off and in bad mood again. Like the whole purpose of meditation is just sort of like realizing, look at me talking about like the whole purpose of meditation, like I'm some kind of enlightened guru.
A yogi.
one of the benefits is just understanding and sort of observing thoughts without connecting to them too much. And so it's like, if you start employing that meditative practice sort of throughout the rest of the day, it's like when you have a bad moment, when you're stuck in traffic, when you drop your perfectly tracked meal all over the floor, you're just like, okay, I can deal with this. Like this rise in anger is just temporary. These unpleasant feelings will pass. There's reasons for them, but they will go. I can still continue with the job that I need. So I do think, like it is a bit guru-y, but the whole meditation thing is just, I think, a good idea. It's a very simple practice for anyone to do, but particularly comp prep athletes. And there's just decent research behind it now. Like there is plenty of studies on how it is just positively affecting people, whether it be in the workplace, or there was a study that showed like greater strength gains, and they did like girth measurements. So it's not a great measure of muscle growth, but like better girth measurement outcomes in a group of lifters that were meditating, as well as, again, just the synergistic effects it starts to have with other things. Like in one study, they showed meditation increased pro-social behavior. And as we know, with contest prep, you start to just become a recluse. Like, and if you're someone that's on that more side of the spectrum, like I am, you haven't got a lot of wiggle room on that side. Like I'm already likely to spend 18 hours a day in my room. Like I start dieting and it's like, I haven't seen Lyndon in 3 months. Like hopefully he's still alive, sort of a thing. So being just really self-aware can really set yourself up for success. And again, this sort of ties back into that primer phase. It's like, if you're not spending, 8, 10, 12 hours in the gym in a week, you can actually start to learn who you are as a person, what you want to do when you're not in the gym. And then that will give you a greater ability to detect, okay, what are the things that I'm not willing to sacrifice in my life? Like, oh, wow, some of these friends actually do mean the world to me when I spend time with them. I'm going to actually try and continue to spend time with them throughout a contest prep. Like we put this big sort of roadblock in our way of always constantly trying to push our nutrition, our dieting, getting our meals in, got to get to bed early, still get to bed early. Actually, that's a non-negotiable. That we get a bit disconnected with who we are and what our life is. So I think if you have a good understanding of that before you get into it, you're going to have a much more successful outcome. Well, I really didn't think I'd be on the Revive Stronger podcast talking about meditation.
You did say it could get a bit hippie and some philosophy coming out. So no, I really liked it because especially when I was hearing you talk through lots of the ideas about kind of getting your cardio in early, lots of these kind of prioritizing your nutritional timing. These are small details that if people aren't at all aware of, can get them in a very stressed state very quickly. I can remember like during my prep, like this is routine and structure. I would go for a walk first thing in the morning for half an hour, get a bunch of steps out of the way, because when you have like, if you're using step targets, if you have 15,000 steps to get in and you've got 10,000 to get in and it's like 9 p.m. and you've got to go to bed, well, yeah, you're meant to get to bed in like an hour. You're not going to get that done. It's not going to happen. Whereas if you can front load some of these stressors, get some of them out the way, it can be really beneficial. And with the fasted cardio, I think even the fact that you get to somewhat kind of push your fasting window a bit later so you don't have to eat as much, I mean, or you get to eat in a smaller window, that helps adherence as well. So these are kind of some of the more art things that maybe a coach can really help you with, like Lyndon would be able to help you with, that maybe you can get some inklings from the book, but that's something that you have to kind of work out for yourself. So I think that's really cool. And the meditation is I guess the big kind of push on it during prep is just because of all these stresses that are going on. Like your physiology is such in a place that like hunger is a term that many people are aware of. Like it's a real thing. You're on edge a lot of the time because the body's in kind of like fight or flight mode. It's in that kind of, I need to hunt, I need to eat. I don't want to be sleeping, those sort of things. So I think that's, all really well said. Is there anything from what we've said here? I think it's always important, especially because we're talking about physiology. Any differences between male and females that you think are worthwhile to point out for people?
I wouldn't like to comment too much, I guess, on the physiological differences between male and female. I guess I would feel more comfortable commenting on how they tend to go about their preps. So just on average, I've seen far better outcomes from females when they just dial down that cardio specifically, and then push their body a little more with the resistance training side of things. Whereas men probably are the opposite, okay? There seems to be some kind of like, look how lean I got without doing cardio kind of, pissing contest that goes on. And I think men are guilty of that to a very large degree. But cardio does some absolutely fantastic things. Like even outside of physique oriented, like it literally helps us grow more neurons in our brain. Like there are just absurd things that happen when we are physically active, and aerobic activity is one of the most, or probably the most well-studied activity. Like it's much more well-studied than resistance training, and there's just profound amounts of benefits from it. So I think men should be a little more open to the idea of doing slightly more cardio, and women should be slightly more open to the idea of maybe doing a little bit less and pushing their resistance training a little more. There are other physiological differences that would probably get me in trouble if I started talking about them, because sex difference is actually one of my favorite niches to study, but I would probably take it political very quickly. So I'll avoid that. Ultimately, they are different, and you get people sitting on either side of this fence on the argument. It's just like, no, women aren't just small men, and you can treat them the same. They're just humans at the end of the day, and the truth lies somewhere between there. Like, yes, probably women's physiology is a little more quick to put up roadblocks. They do need to just, as we spoke about, coaxing the physiology and just sort of like dropping breadcrumbs and just being like, here, come on, sort of just little steps. Women's physiology probably just needs to be nurtured just that fraction more than men's. However, I see a lot of females that come into JPS or contact me asking for help, and they're feeling like the weight of how hard it is for females to lose weight, like on their shoulders, and just like, oh, but females have it so much harder than men. Like they don't burn fat as easily, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but you want to compete against females. Like you're not standing, next to Phil Heath. Like, yeah, Phil can get leaner than you much more easily. You're not standing next to him on stage. Or it's like, even if you're just going to the beach, you're not comparing yourself to the 6'4" lifeguard. Like you're comparing yourself to every other woman on that beach. Well, you probably shouldn't be. That's ultimately who you're comparing yourself to. So I don't think it's really a worthwhile discussion. I shouldn't say it's not worthwhile. I don't think women should be worrying about it to the degree that they probably are, how difficult it is for them to lose fat, because the comparison is to other women, not men. Yeah, I think that's about all I'll say on the topic.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think the idea of what we talked about here in terms of like homeostasis and survival, women are at the end of the day kind of the people who are giving birth, and they're leading to what are, as a kind of, I guess, at the core of our reasoning that we're on Earth to reproduce. So they're set up better for survival. So they fight that a little bit harder. So it can get more tricky. And I love the kind of anecdote of cardio as well, because I think men probably are a little bit more against it, probably rooted in lots of kind of just like rooted from years ago, lesser from kind of some of the rationale behind bodybuilding or anything, just rooted in kind of the way we're brought up and our ideologies and principles. Same with females in doing more cardio, because that's what women always did to get in shape. So I think it's very much rooted in that. So I think it's a good idea. And what you said there, kind of to have that just as because we all probably have that slight bias in our head just because it's somewhat rooted there. So Lyndon, I want to say a massive thank you for coming on. This hour has gone really quickly, and it's been really interesting talking about all these different aspects. And I want to encourage people. I think people will be encouraged to check out the Bath seminar. We're going to be digging into a lot more detail than this. But if people want to find out more about yourself, Lyndon, find out more of the information you're putting out, you write blog articles and things like this, where should they head?
So to find more of my, I guess, educational content, just head to the JPS website. It's like jpshealthandfitness.com.au, I think. Find my blogs there. I really enjoy writing, so hopefully people enjoy reading them. Occasionally I'll be popping up on the YouTube channel, those kinds of things, but mostly if you're just paying attention to JPS on Instagram, JPS Education, or if you want to find me on my own personal Instagram, that's up to you.
We'll link it below. We've got to know the username though. And where did that come from? Let's have a story.
So my username, for those who are unaware, is hot and Dondrous. So hot _ and _ Dondrous. I get called Don, like Lyndon, and innumerable other variations, but it basically came from the Kesha song, like Hot and Dangerous.
Right.
So it was just Hot and Dondrous, and Jacob has nagged me for at least 2 years straight to change it now. And yeah, every time he asks me to change it, I just mark it down and go another month before I change it. So I don't post a heap of, I guess, fitness related content on there. Like if you're going to be looking for infographics and information like that, like there's far better people to follow than that. I do like to use my Instagram as just obviously an extension of myself and things that I'm thinking about. Like it isn't just fitness related. I would like to think of myself, I guess, as more of a thinker about problems just in general. Yeah, probably my favorite way of thinking about problems is through the lens of fitness, health and fitness, physique, obesity, these kinds of things. But yeah, there'll definitely be some philosophical things on there, or things that might push your buttons if you're interested in that. But yeah, no, thank you again for having me on, Steve. It was an absolute pleasure.
Of course. Thank you guys for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.